Do you constantly compare yourself to unrealistic expectations? I know that I do this all the time, and in my next video, I'm going to talk about how to move past the strive for perfection. Hey there, I'm Elysha. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm talking about perfection because I think we all know that nobody's perfect, yet we still compare ourselves to these unrealistic expectations. I do it all the time. In fact, I just did it the other day in yoga. I go to this hot yoga class that tends to get really packed. So I'm there a few minutes before class begins and I'm lying in Shavasana on my back, just waiting. But yet I open my eyes and I notice that there's this man, this shirtless man, and he came in at the last minute and he's kind of wandering around looking for a spot. The place was packed. It was wall to wall bodies. There's like no space for anyone to go. So I'm lying there trying to be in Shavasana, but I'm kind of like this, because I'm wondering, like, what is this guy gonna do? And please don't go near me, please don't go near me, please don't go near me. So what happens? He goes right next to me. So I have to scoop my mat over and create space for him. So now we're like, what, 2 millimeters apart from each other. And I mentioned that he's shirtless, which isn't really a big deal, except this is hot yoga. So remember that the room gets to be like 105 degrees or something. And the fact that he's shirtless just means that there's one less layer to catch his sweat. We start class and it's tight. I'm feeling pretty crowded, but I tell myself, okay, just close your eyes and get really into the practice, go deep, do your postures, forget about this guy next to you, don't think about it at all. But the thing is that our mats are basically touching, and I am just looking at this guy and I'm thinking about all his imperfections. I'm looking at his body as he's doing his poses and his form and everything, and I am just so crowded and feeling so uncomfortable that his imperfections, or what I consider to be his imperfections, they start glaring at me in the face. So then what happens is I start to notice how judgy I'm being. And remember, we're in a yoga class. I practice a lot of yoga. I have been doing yoga for a long time. So I'm very familiar with these teachers. And what I was doing in that moment was so far from yoga. I was judging this guy and I started getting upset with myself, because now I'm realizing how far I am from practicing yoga and how judgmental I am in my mind and how imperfect I am. So now my imperfections are glaring at me, and I'm basically going nuts in my mind at this point. And I'm going through the yoga class, but my mind is just so mad at myself because I'm so imperfect, because I'm not some enlightened yogi who can just let this guy sweat drip all over my mat, because that's what was happening. The yoga teacher, meanwhile, in the background of all my thoughts, I've got this, if anyone's perfect, it's this yoga teacher. She's in her gorgeous voice, she's got this French accent, she's speaking in English, and she's talking about loving kindness and having compassion for yourself. So this is all the background soundtrack to what's going on, to my judging, first my neighbor and now myself, about how imperfect I am. Then the perfect yoga teacher calls out fallen triangle. And if you know this pose, it's when your leg shoots out to the side, and in my mind, I'm like, it is way too crowded to do this pose. How could you call this pose? So then what happens is my neighbor, his foot comes onto my mat. I almost lost it. Like he was dripping sweat. Everybody's dripping sweat, but his sweat was going on my mat. And I just started to get so uncomfortable, and I started to get so angry. I even said, oh God. And then the yoga teacher from there goes into, what's that pose called? It's upside down downward dog. Some people call it rock star. Anyway, she says to flip your dog. So that's like flipping over, and that pose takes up even more space than fallen triangle. So now the guy, he's basically on my mat, and his sweat is dripping on my mat. and I lost it. I couldn't handle it anymore. At that point, I went into child's pose because I just needed to get myself together. I was starting to lose my mind, literally, and I was so angry at myself because why did I care so much about this? I could clean my mat later. I don't know, I was getting so caught up in this guy's sweat on my mat. It was taking over the whole class. So, I forgot to mention this, but earlier in the class when I had my eyes open, I noticed that there was an empty mat in the back of the room, and this mat had like 10 inches of space on both sides. So at this point, after I was in child's pose, I got up, I picked up my water bottle, and then I went to that mat in the back of the class. So once I got onto this other mat, I had a ton of space. Yeah, everybody's sweating next to me. They're doing all their fallen triangles and you know, flip downward dogs, but I didn't care anymore because nobody's sweaty feet were on my mat. I had my space, but yet still I was festering with my imperfections. I was still even thinking about that guy's imperfections. I couldn't let it go. I tried to follow my breath because, you know, yoga, meditation 101, come back to the breath. I tried so hard to do it, but I couldn't. And then finally, class is starting to wind down. We're coming into our closing postures. I begin to accept. I start to accept all of those things that I was thinking, that, you know what? I'm not that evolved yogi who can handle some guy, some stranger's sweat dripping all over my mat. I get really skeeved out by that. I think it's gross, and that's just who I am. So I started to accept that about myself, and when I did, I started to feel a little better. It was like a little load had gotten taken off. So I'm starting to accept some of my imperfections of who I am. But then I was a little bit embarrassed because I was that person. I was that person who couldn't take the heat. I actually had to remove myself from that crowded center of the room area and bring myself into another place. So I was a little embarrassed that people were gonna judge me. Oh, she's not the evolved yogi. She had to get out of there. She went to the back of the room. So I started feeling a little bit ashamed of who I was. But then I was like, you know what? I got myself out of that situation. I was not comfortable there at all. I was starting to lose it, actually. And what did I do? I was resourceful. I saw that spot in the back of the room and I took it. I took care of myself. I knew what I needed to do and I did it. So I honored the unevolved person, if that's what you want to call it. I honored my imperfections. I just honored who I was, and I took care of myself, and I got myself out of that situation into a space that literally had more space. And then I started worrying about how was I going to get out of there? What do I do? My mat is still next to that guy. I have to go get my mat. What am I going to do? Oh, the teacher, she's going to judge me for, oh, that woman, she couldn't handle the class. Why is she even taking hot yoga? So the class ended and I go up and I get my mat and I look at the neighbor, my neighbor, the shirtless guy sweating. He wasn't even looking at me. Okay, so I roll up my mat and then I leave the class, and the instructor, she was in deep conversation with someone else. She didn't care about what I did. The guy didn't care what I did. I had this whole freaking war in my brain that went on. I was battling myself and nobody even knew what was going on. I was in chaos in my brain, in my mind. But it was all in my head, and it was me dealing with my imperfections. And, you know, I was, what's that called? I was projecting my imperfections onto this guy next to me. He was just some yogi, came there to get his sweat on because the same reason I do, it feels great to sweat like that. So I left the yoga studio and I came to the realization that, first of all, nobody really cares what I'm doing. So that's the first thing. But also by owning who I am, I'm not that evolved yogi who can handle someone's sweat all over my mat, and taking care of myself by getting myself onto that other mat in that more spacious area. These are things that helped me move through that whole experience of dealing with my imperfections. So I don't know if you ever have anything like this happen to you, but it happens to me all the time. This is just a really recent one that I wanted to share of how I moved through my own experience of dealing with my imperfections. So thank you for watching, and I hope you liked it. If so, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next Wednesday. Okay, thanks.